leadership takes many forms. And everybody, as I said, kind of to get this going, leads in their own way. We all have, as big as possible, a unique challenge in dealing with very flat organizations that are filled with leaders. But each one of those leaders has its own style and profile. And as much as it's a psychological game on a day-to-day basis to work with lawyers, breaking down what that psychology means and looks like kind of is foundational for our understanding and how we can work and make our lawyers succeed as well as they can. So David has done a lot of work in this area, and so I thought we would start today by asking David to talk about the different leadership profiles and what that means in our industry.
Okay, thank you. Well, it was interesting. This morning I went on Amazon, Subset Books, typed in the word leadership, 90,348 entries. And so leadership is not something that is new to anybody. We talk about it all the time. Everybody's got a different model. But at the end of the day, we're trying to do the same thing. How can we get people to do things we want them to do? And so the challenge often is the translation. How can we take some of these models, some of these techniques, some of these approaches, and apply it in a law firm environment so that we get it and our lawyers get it? And so there's one book that I especially like, and it's called Primal Leadership. One of the authors is Daniel Goleman, who wrote Emotional Intelligence. And what I love about it is he came up with this model of 6 leadership styles. And what I like about it is it's one of those Jerry Maguire moments. You had me at hello. You know, you hear this and you go, I got it. This can apply here in the law firm. So what I want to share with you are some of these 6 leadership styles because I think they apply so well inside of our firms. The first style they talk about is the visionary style of leadership. And there's a quote from Napoleon. He says, "A leader is a dealer in hope." And so what is missing often inside of our law firms is a vision for where are we going as a firm? Within your own departments, where are we going as a department? The lawyers themselves, where are we going within our practice group? What's the firm doing? And so what the leaders need to do, both from your chairs as well as the lawyers, and I'm going to go back and forth between what the lawyers need and what we can do, is to be able to give a picture of what the future looks like, especially when we've gone through such hard times. Our leaders really need to paint a good path on what is today and what does tomorrow look like and how are we going to get there. And so some of the tools you can use are going through collaborative planning exercises. Because yes, a leader can stand up and say, we are going here, but our law firms are filled with a bunch of skeptical people. And so if you can get them involved in the process to understand why are we thinking we want to get there, that helps with the process of getting them bought into it. And getting the buy-in, or getting out of the shower and doing something with an idea, we have to get our lawyers into and out of that shower. So the visionary style is something that's very, very important and often very missing in most organizations. The second style they talk about is the coaching style of leadership. And in the book, they did their studies, and the studies say that the style of leadership that generates the most revenue inside of an organization is the coaching style of leadership. And how great would it be to have a law firm that would be completely filled with people who are exhibiting the coaching style, helping people attach where they want to go as individuals with where the organization wants to go. And there's a great book out there called Aligning the Stars, written by a Harvard professor. His name, it's on the book list, I think.
There's a book list on your tables. You don't have to write all these down.
Jay Lorsch. And it's all about the job for professional services, and he wrote about professional services. The job of a professional services organization is to find star performers, to attract star performers, to keep them and grow them, and to align their interests with the organization's interests. That's when you're going to get the most out of someone. So to apply the coaching style of leadership, you probably do it inside of your own teams, but to get it to happen more within the law firm is powerful. This is the style that's missing in many, many organizations, and as I said, generates the most revenue. How can we do this? One-on-one conversations with people, the active listening style, giving good constructive feedback, and most important that's missing in most situations is follow-up, follow-up, follow-up. Third style, the affiliative style, which is creating a nice vibe inside of an organization, bringing people together on a personal level. And that's important in organizations where there's dysfunction, where there's been really hard times, where people don't necessarily like each other. Or maybe you've got a lot of laterals who have come in and they don't know each other, so you need to put social events and things together, so you get to know each other on a personal basis. The downside is that with the affiliative style, sometimes these people don't drive people into performance because they just care about the touchy-feely, I want to make a nice environment here. So then that brings us to another style, which is the democratic style, which is a style we have a lot of in our law firms. Let's get consensus. We won't make a decision without everybody being involved. It's good for buy-in. It's bad for moving quickly. So we've got to balance all these out. So in the book, they call these the 4 resonant style. They resonate with people. Then there are 2 styles that are more of the dissonant styles. The first one is the pace-setting style. And actually in the book, they talk about law firms. Because, how do our practice leaders get assigned their position? Usually because they're the pace setters. They've got the biggest book of business, and so they're put in a leadership position. Doesn't mean that they can lead. So what they know is what they've done, which is I'm going to push you harder, faster, go stronger. It's good to a point, but people can get burnt out, and there's a lot of micromanagement that can go on there. So you've got to balance all these different styles out. As they said in the book, the leadership styles are like playing golf. You've got a lot of different clubs. You use them in different situations. And then the last style I'll talk about is the commanding style. And in the book, and I think our own personal experiences, the commanding style is often the least effective style. Nobody likes to be yelled at. Nobody likes to be told what to do. There are times where it has to happen. But we've got to balance that out with all the different styles. So whether within your own groups or helping your lawyers figure out how they need to lead each other, going through this filter of the 6 styles can be very, very helpful.
Thanks, David. That's fantastic to kind of set the stage for what we're going to do here. Those of you that know me, I have 2 things that I like to do in every presentation, and one is give a book recommendation. And so when we were preparing for today's session, we were talking about what books we all like, what we have all been reading, what's on our nightstand, and those that have lasted. And so there's 4 handouts that we put on each table, and one of them is our reading list. It's extensive. I think there's 21 books on there, and we all have a different story about why those books are important to us. And in David's section, it mentions Primal Leadership, a book that also stays on my nightstand. The second thing I like to do is, so that's my takeaway. Our book recommendation is the takeaway, and then I want to manage all of your expectations. So what we're going to do in this program is define leadership, talk about motivating people, defining success, because if leadership doesn't have a goal, what's the point? And then some best practices, and that's the arc of our program today. So I think both Sherry, a lot of our panelists today, Sherry and Jody have experience outside of legal, and Jody, as she mentioned in her introduction, is more recent and newer to legal. So Jody, I ask you to talk a little bit about your experience coming into legal and how that compares to the Booz Allen days.
Okay. And in listening to David, I think the consulting model is probably in the coaching sort of thing, except it has almost like a marine-like approach to it, where they'd sort of break you down and then build you back up. So it's a pretty tough environment. And yet at the same time, the whole goal was to make sure that people were reaching their fullest potential, being the best that they could possibly be. And so that's going to appeal to a particular type of person. The biggest difference was that it was an up or out culture. So you basically have, it's really like 2 to 3 years to develop particular competencies with the expectation that you would advance to the next level after that. And if you haven't mastered those competencies, you would be asked to leave. And that was just known. So you could just imagine when your job's on the line, how seriously everyone had, you would take your professional development very, very seriously. So that was performance management and competency development was probably the most significant mechanism that consulting has, and it's pretty consistent across the consulting firms. Do we have any people from consulting here in the room? Okay, so it's really was the mechanism that would drive performance, and yeah, it was definitely one of the most. It was a tough environment, but it appealed to people. Earlier, when we were talking about this, I was asked, what I would consider to be the biggest difference between working with the lawyers and the consultants. And I'd have to say that, it's hard to make generalizations, but there certainly it was a much more non-confrontational kind of environment, and there was less, trying to think of a nice way to say this, but less overt displays of emotion.
Can I say something?
Sure, of course, Sherry.
I also came from a management consulting background. I was at McKinsey for a few years, and one of the things that's most notably different to me, that I think the consulting firms are fabulous at building legions of leaders, people who have the confidence to lead, because from the moment that a person crosses the threshold, no matter what their job is, they're told, you are here because you are the best at what you do. We're going to pay you a little more than you could get on the street. We're going to expect a lot more of you than you might get someplace else, but this work is going to be seductive and you're part of the team. That, no matter, even when you're there at 2 o'clock in the morning and you haven't eaten for 18 hours, it's inspiring. And I think that's how you truly build a team of leaders, that we could do so much better in the law firm environment of making everyone feel special. Did Booz do that?
Yeah, but I would also argue the Marines do that as well, if you think about it. Sort of, the elite.
The only thing, we didn't have to carry guns.
Yeah. One of the things that I always observe, and I try and remind people that are in a marketing position and when I'm speaking to groups of lawyers, is the legal training is basically to find fault with everything you see, everything you're presented with, but also to create at the same time the perfect document, knowing that when you give it to the other side, their goal is then to find fault with it. That is a very vicious cycle. And when we do like some of the emotional intelligence stuff and personality profiling, lawyers have the lowest resiliency of any profession. They're hyper defensive, they're reactionary, they think everything is a personal attack and criticism, and that their lack of perfection is a failure. So keep that in mind. And we in marketing and business development and communications frequently are the non-lawyer brunts of that. So Jennifer, I think you have an interesting experience as well, having recently moved into a very large global organization. The numbers in your department, I think, are maybe double Sherry's of marketing business development professionals. But tell us a little bit about what it means to be a regional or practice group type leader versus the head of a group, what your experience has led you to uncover.
Right, yeah. And I have to say, Latham has a brilliant mix of all of those leadership styles, from the chairman of the firm, the executive directors, the practice heads. They're not always the highest fee generators, but they definitely have leadership competencies, and so it's a really interesting and challenging environment for us in business development, because they actually are great leaders, and they challenge us not to push them to be better leaders, but to actually produce. And that's one of the big differences. We have a department of 130 business development professionals, and I have to say, everyone on our team is busy and puts in more time and effort and energy than I ever thought a BD department in a law firm could put in. And some of that, I think, is part of the consultancy culture that Latham has tried to bring in. I came from Allen Matkins, which was, I cut my teeth there. It's one of the best group of lawyers that I've ever had the privilege of knowing. And the difference for me is that I was able to affect change there relatively quickly. And if I could come up with a pretty solid business case, I could typically get a few lawyers to let me give something a shot. And in Latham, I have a global strategic client committee of 10, and we're rolling out the first client service program that the firm has ever had. And it takes a lot more time to get things done. And there are so many constituencies inside the firm. And so all we're trying to do is bring the voice of the client back into the strategy of the firm. And so to lead that kind of culture change, especially without a chief title, is a lot different.
Yeah. And Jennifer, just a quick follow-up question related to that. When you think about globally with people in different time zones, different cultures, different environments, different practice groups, are there any skills that you think you mentioned bringing the client's voice in as a huge strategy as the why we do something. How have you been able to actually bring the client's voice in?
I act more as a third-party observer, so I don't really have an emotional investment in what happens in the firm. I want them to be successful, and I want them to be productive and engaged, but I don't take sides, and so I tend to stay relatively neutral. I think the other thing, and it's a book on the list, is that talent is overrated when you're trying to help with culture change. We're all born with a skill set, but that's not what makes us good at our jobs. It's our passion and our commitment. And I think that's one of the big differences for me.